The words hang in the air, colder than the wind sweeping down from the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. I cannot. Garrett Thorne does not shout. He does not even have the decency to sound angry. His voice is a flat, dismissive thing, a stone dropped into a still well. The photograph was flattering. You have a plain face, Miss Vance. I require a wife who is an asset, not a chore. Alara stands on the rough-hewn porch of the Thorne Ranch, her small trunk at her feet, the dust of a 1,000-mile train journey still clinging to the hem of her best wool dress. The man who was meant to be her husband stares at a point just over her shoulder, as if looking at her directly is too much of an offense. She feels the blood drain from her cheeks, a chilling vacancy where hope had lived just moments before. The buckboard that brought her from the station is already a shrinking speck on the horizon, its driver no doubt eager to spread the news in town. She is stranded. She is rejected. She is nothing. They faced harsh judgment, but someone saw their true value. Before this story unfolds, tell us, have you ever stood up for someone unfairly judged? If you believe in looking beyond the surface, hit like and subscribe. The bargain had been struck with a photograph and 3 letters. Hers, pinned in a neat, practical script, spoke of her skills in housekeeping, her resilience, and her desire for a new life away from the crowded orphanage where she'd aged out. His, written in a bold, arrogant scrawl, spoke of his prosperous ranch, his need for a strong wife to manage his home, and his expectations of loyalty and obedience. The photograph he'd sent was of a handsome, square-jawed man with eyes that seemed to challenge the world. The one she'd sent was an honest, unsmiling portrait. She had never considered herself beautiful, but she'd always believed her worth lay in her character, in the strength of her hands and the steadiness of her heart. Now, under Garrett Thorne's assessing gaze, that belief felt like a child's fantasy. He saw only a surface, and he had found it wanting. With a final, curt nod, he turned his back on her. And in that moment, as the vast, indifferent Wyoming sky pressed down, Alara Vance understood she had been utterly and completely ruined. The silence in the Thorne house was a living thing. It settled in the corners like dust and lay heavy on the polished wood of the long dining table. Garrett had, after a moment of cold deliberation, decided she could not simply be cast out into the wilderness. It would look bad. Appearances, Alara was learning, were everything to him. So, a new bargain was struck, one of humiliation. She would stay and work off the cost of her train ticket. She was not a bride, not even a guest. She was debt personified, a scullery made with a ghost of a marriage contract hanging over her head. He gave her a small room at the back of the house, little more than a closet with a cot, its single window looking out onto a barren patch of dirt. The main house was well built and sturdy, but it felt as cold and empty as a banker's vault. There were no feminine touches, no softness, just leather, wood, and the ever-present silence. Garrett ran his ranch with brutal efficiency, his orders to his 2 ranch hands sharp and infrequent. He ate his meals quickly, his eyes on his plate, never on her as she served him. Alara worked from before dawn until long after dusk, her hands quickly growing rough. She scrubbed floors, mended clothes, cooked, and cleaned, pouring all her shame and fury into the labor. The work was a shield, a way to keep from thinking about the town she couldn't face, the future she didn't have. On the 3rd day, she discovered the source of a different kind of silence. She had heard movement from a room down the hall, a soft shuffling, the quiet tap of a cane. Garrett had never mentioned anyone else. She was clearing the breakfast dishes when a man emerged from that room. He was tall like Garrett, with the same strong set to his shoulders, but his face was gentler, the lines around his mouth hinting at a kindness Garrett's lacked. His hair was the color of dark honey, and his eyes, a startling pale blue, were unfocused. They stared ahead, seeing nothing. "Garrett?" he asked, his voice a low, pleasant rumble that was a stark contrast to his brother's clipped tones. He took a hesitant step forward, his hand outstretched, searching for the back of a chair. Alara froze, the plates rattling in her hands. The sound drew his attention. "Hello? Is someone there?" She found her voice, a small, wavering thing. It is Alara Vance, sir." A slow smile transformed his face. It was a genuine, unguarded expression that made him look years younger than his brother. "Miss Vance, the mail-order bride. I am Silas, Garrett's younger brother, He tilted his head, listening. Your voice is softer than I imagined. Like rain on a dry roof. Alara felt a blush creep up her neck, a warmth that was entirely unfamiliar. No one had ever said such a thing to her. Garrett strode back into the room then, his presence immediately sucking the warmth out of the air. Silas, I'm taking care of it, he snapped, his words a clear warning. Silas's smile faded, but he didn't retreat. Taking care of what, brother? Offering our guest some breakfast. He turned his head in Alara's direction. He has manners, Miss Vance. He just misplaces them often. She is not a guest, Garrett said, his voice flat and cold. She is staff. She is working off her passage. Now, go back to your workshop, Silas. You'll get underfoot. The cruelty of the statement was breathtaking. Alara watched Silas's shoulders tighten, a flicker of pain crossing his features before it was replaced by a mask of practiced neutrality. Without another word, he turned and navigated his way back down the hall, the tap-tap-tap of his cane echoing in the renewed silence. Alara stared at Garrett, a new emotion joining the shame and anger, a profound, burning contempt. He hadn't just rejected her for her face. He was a man who was cruel to his own blind brother. From that day on, Alara's world divided itself into two distinct parts: the cold, demanding sphere of Garrett and the quiet, unseen world of Silas. She learned his routines. He spent most of his days in a small workshop attached to the barn, a place that smelled of sawdust and linseed oil. He was a woodcarver. His hands, long-fingered and calloused, moved with a startling grace and certainty over blocks of pine and aspen. He carved birds, horses, and wolves, their forms so lifelike they seemed to be breathing. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them. He knew every curve, every plane, every delicate line of feather or fur. She began leaving his meals on a small table just inside the workshop door, not wanting to disturb him. But one afternoon, he called out to her as she was leaving. Miss Vance, please, stay a moment. She hesitated, then stepped into the sun-drenched space. Wood shavings curled on the floor like fallen leaves. My brother. He doesn't speak of it, Silas began, his hands resting on a half-finished hawk. But I know this must be a difficult situation for you. I am managing Mr. Thorne, she replied, her voice stiff with pride. Silas, please, he gestured to a stool. Tell me something, Alara. What color is the sky today? The question was so unexpected it disarmed her. She looked out the wide-open door. It's a very deep blue, almost violet near the mountains. There's one long, thin cloud, like a scratch of white paint. He nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. A scratch of white paint. I like that. He held out the wooden hawk. Tell me about this one. My hands know the shape, but my memory of color fades. And so began their ritual. She would describe the world to him in exchange for moments of quiet companionship. She told him about the subtle shift from green to gold in the aspen leaves, the fiery red of the Indian paintbrush blooming by the creek, the way the frost etched patterns like ferns on the window panes. In return, he told her about the ranch, about the sounds of the different seasons, the smell of an approaching storm, the feel of the sun on his face. She learned he hadn't been born blind. A ranching accident 5 years prior, a spooked horse, a fall, a blow to the head, had stolen his sight. It had also stolen his place in the world. Garrett, who had once ridden beside him, now treated him like a fragile burden. He thinks I'm useless, Silas said one evening, his voice devoid of self-pity, stating it as a simple fact. They were sitting on a bench behind the barn, the scent of hay and drying earth around them. He can't see the value in anything that can't be measured in acres or dollars. What you do is not useless, Alara said fiercely, thinking of the beautiful, intricate carvings that filled his workshop. You create things. You make beauty. He turned his face toward her, his sightless eyes seeming to search her. No one has said that to me in a long time. Their conversations became the anchor of her days. With Silas, she was not plain-faced Miss Vance, she was simply Alara. He listened to her opinions, laughed at her wry observations, and valued her presence. He would ask her to read to him in the evenings from the small collection of books in the parlor, poetry, history, adventure novels. Garrett would often walk through the room during these sessions, his disapproval a palpable force. He'd scoff, make a comment about Silas wasting the hired help's time, and slam a door on his way out. But his disapproval only seemed to solidify the quiet bond forming between his brother and the woman he'd discarded. Garrett saw Alara scrubbing his floors and thought of her as a failed transaction. Silas heard Alara's voice describing a sunset and began to think of her as the sunrise itself. One afternoon, Garrett returned from town in a foul mood. A deal for a neighboring parcel of land had fallen through. He stormed into the kitchen where Alara was kneading bread, his face a thundercloud. "This is your fault," he snarled, slamming his hat on the table. Alara looked up, bewildered. "My fault. The whole town is whispering. Garrett Thorne, the man who sent for a bride and got a scullery maid, they think I'm a fool. That my judgment is poor," he advanced on her, his voice low and menacing. "They look at me and they see your plain, forgettable face." Alara shrank back, her hands white with flour, her heart pounding. "Leave her be, Garrett." Silas stood in the doorway, his cane held firmly in one hand. He had clearly heard the shouting from his room. His stance was calm, but his voice held a core of steel Alara had never heard before. "Stay out of this, Silas," Garrett shot back. "This is business." "She is not business," Silas said, taking a slow step into the room. He moved with the careful confidence of a man who knows his own territory. "She is a person, a woman you wronged, who has done nothing but work with dignity in this house you've turned into a prison." Garrett laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Dignity? She's an object of pity. And you, sitting in the dark, what would you know of it? You haven't even seen her." "That's where you're wrong, brother," Silas replied, his voice dropping, becoming dangerously quiet. "I see her more clearly than you ever will. I see her kindness when she describes the world for me. I see her strength in the way she has endured your cruelty without complaint. I see her intelligence in the books she reads and the questions she asks. You saw a photograph and a face. I have seen a soul." The kitchen fell silent, the air thick with tension. Garrett stared at his brother, his mouth agape, a flicker of disbelief and something akin to fury in his eyes. He was seeing it for the first time, the deep, unshakable connection that had grown right under his nose, in the shadows of his own arrogance. Alara looked at Silas, who stood like a bastion between her and his brother, and felt a wave of emotion so powerful it threatened to buckle her knees. In that moment, he was the most beautiful man she had ever seen. The confrontation in the kitchen was a declaration of war. Garrett, incensed and humiliated by his brother's defiance, became openly hostile. The fragile peace of the ranch was shattered. He saw the way Silas would wait for Alara to finish her chores, the way they would walk together near the creek, her arm lightly in his, describing the flow of the water. He saw the small, wildflower bouquet she placed in a jar on Silas's workshop table. He saw laughter and light in his house for the first time, and he hated it because he was not the source of it, and it was centered on the woman he had deemed worthless. His retaliation was petty and cruel. He doubled Alara's workload, assigning her grueling tasks meant to keep her away from Silas. Mending fences in the far pasture, whitewashing the entire barn, sorting rotting potatoes in the root cellar. He was trying to exhaust her, to break her spirit and drive a wedge of labor between her and his brother. But he underestimated them both. Silas, who had for years been content in his quiet world, began to emerge from it. He would find her wherever she was working. He couldn't help with the whitewashing, but he could sit nearby, telling her stories to make the time pass, his calm presence a balm against Garrett's tyranny. He couldn't mend the fences, but he could bring her a cool drink of water and a piece of bread and cheese for lunch, navigating the uneven ground with a new determination. He was fighting for her in the only ways he could. The breaking point came a month later. Garrett rode into the yard one Saturday afternoon, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He dismounted and strode onto the porch where Alara was sweeping. "Pack your things, Miss Vance," he announced, his voice loud enough to carry. "Your debt is paid. I've found you a position in town. At the saloon." Alara's broom clattered to the floor. The saloon. It was a fate reserved for the most desperate women, a place of leering men and cheap whiskey. It was a final, devastating insult, a way to cast her out and brand her as fallen. "You will do no such thing," Silas said. He stepped out of the front door, his face pale but resolute. He wasn't holding his cane. He stood tall, unaided, as if his sheer force of will was holding him upright. Garrett smirked. I am the master of this ranch, little brother. I make the decisions. She is leaving. No, Silas said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. She is staying. With me. With you? Garrett let out a disbelieving laugh. And what will you do? Carve her a little wooden house to live in. I have my inheritance, Silas stated, his voice level. Mother left her portion of the land to me, not to the ranch. I've let you manage it all these years, Garrett. I've let you run my life. That ends today. I'll sell my portion to you, or I'll sell it to Mr. Henderson on the neighboring property. I hear he's looking to expand. Either way, I will have enough to buy my own place. A place for me. And for Alara. If she will have me. He turned his head toward Alara, his sightless eyes full of a desperate, earnest hope. It wasn't a proposal born of pity or convenience. It was a plea, a choice, an offering of everything he was and everything he had. Alara looked from Garrett's sneering face to Silas's open, vulnerable one. The shame that had been her constant companion for months fell away, replaced by a fierce, protective love. She had come to Wyoming seeking a home and had found one not in the sturdy wooden house, but in the heart of this kind, quiet man. She walked across the porch and took Silas's hand. Her fingers curled around his, a silent answer that was stronger than any words. I will have you, Silas, she said, her voice clear and strong. Garrett stared at their joined hands, at the defiant set of Alara's chin, at the unwavering strength on his brother's face. He saw two people who had found a world in each other, a world from which he was completely excluded. The value he'd failed to see, the worth he'd so carelessly discarded, was now the foundation of a life he could never be a part of. He had looked for a prize and had thrown away a treasure. He was the master of a large, prosperous, and profoundly empty ranch. Alone. The sun is setting, casting long, golden fingers of light across the porch. It's a different porch, on a smaller homestead a few miles down the creek, bought with the money from Silas's inheritance. The house is modest, but the windows are clean, and a small, vibrant garden, tended by Alara's hand, thrives near the front steps. There are pots of wildflowers on the railing, their colors brilliant in the evening light. Silas sits in a rocking chair he carved himself, his hands resting on its smooth, worn arms. Alara is beside him, mending one of his shirts, the needle flashing in the fading light. The air is peaceful, filled with the gentle hum of insects and the distant lowing of their single dairy cow. There is no oppressive silence here, only a comfortable quiet born of shared understanding. He turns his face toward her, a soft smile on his lips. What color is it now, Alara? He asks, the familiar, beloved question. She looks out at the mountains, which are turning a deep, hazy purple against a sky streaked with rose and orange. She doesn't just see the colors anymore. She feels them. She thinks of how to describe this particular beauty for him, how to gift him this moment of breathtaking peace. It's the color of a promise, Silas, she says softly, her needle pausing. The color of a promise kept. He reaches out, and his hand finds hers, his fingers warm and strong around her own. He doesn't need to see her face to know the truth. He had recognized her in the dark. He had seen her with his heart. And in his world, she was, and always would be, the most beautiful thing he had ever known. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. Her true worth was finally seen. What does true value in a person mean to you? Tell us below.